slide.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:02 PM. And I'm trying to get the agenda pulled up. So, I don't know how we're gonna do roll call. I'm here, you're here.
I'm here. Christine
Alright.
Gator, there we go.
Is Sarah online?
I don't see her yet, no.
Okay.
And we'll just watch for her. I'm gonna take some minutes since Pat is not there.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, we'll move into public comment. Seeing none.
I set out all those chairs.
We don't technically have a quorum.
No, voting.
We're not making any decisions.
No,
so-
but
Presentation.
the minutes.
Oh,
So
so
those-
we'll have
So we'll
to
have to
postpone.
postpone that.
Oh. Yes, sir.
Good call, good call.
All right, so we'll move into our next agenda item, which is the 2024 draft budget. So I know that we've all had an opportunity to submit questions by email. Presentation is going to be a bit, so we'll try and keep this to hour and a half. And if there's any in-depth questions that we can't answer tonight, it's definitely okay to follow up by email. So anything high level though, we'll try and address. Turn it over to you, Mr. Rhodes.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, committee and others who have joined us. Let me just say my apologies up front for those who already sat through the budget presentation, Trustee Gator and others, and those my colleagues behind me. I'll try to add in any new twists in the last week or so and updates as we go along to keep it fresh. We're gonna, and I'll try to move things along as well, but please feel free to just interject if you have questions of things that make sense. Happy to take that at any point. So starting out, we're gonna look at the budget calendar really quickly. We're calling this part 3 because the board has already looked in depth at the operating budget in 2 other sessions. We're going to look in some depth at the general fund revenues and expenditures, and then we'll look at the other special funds, the enterprise funds and the special revenue funds as well. The calendar, just as a reminder, we started on September 19 and October 3. We looked at the operating budget as well as the capital improvement budget. We did a budget overview with the board last week, and we're here tonight with the committee, but we've got a bonanza tomorrow. I'm still not sure exactly what that is, but I'm very excited. Have not experienced that yet, so looking forward to that. There's a budget work session next week where we're going to bring some updates that I'll talk about as we go through there that we talked about over the past week. And then we have right now the scheduled adoption is for the December 12th meeting. So just some highlights to go through here. The proposed budget is 67 million, just over that. But it's bigger than usual because of the large capital improvement budget as we're finishing up those 2 large capital projects, the water plant, the wastewater plant. It's sort of outsized this year. So the operating budget is 23 million and the capital improvement budget 44 million. Some good news, and as I told the board last week, I'll try to let the committee know where the good news is good and where it's not so good. We'll talk about that as well, but bringing clarity to the good and the not so good is kind of the first step to figuring out what to do about it. So all funds are projected to meet the board adopted last December. The board adopted some fund balance policies as far as what they should meet, and so the funds, all funds do meet those requirements. However, the water and sewer funds, as we'll talk about, don't meet some debt service coverage requirements. So we'll go over what that means when we get to those funds. And also, just so we're all on the same page, the proposed budget does include all recommended position changes and merit and COLA increases and other operational proposed budget items. Not that all of that is going to be approved by the board. We don't presume that, but so you have a full impact of the budget that's included in the numbers we're looking at. Other highlights, another good news thing, the general fund budget is balanced. So which to me, the definition, I'll be doing some definitional things here since this is, I'm new here. Want to make sure we're talking about the same language. So if I kind of overdo the definitions, excuse me this one time. So that we're all talking about the same things. But to me, budget balance means that the projected revenues in the general fund exceed the projected expenditures. We don't have to pull from fund balance this year by almost $400,000. Giving us a fund balance, and we'll look at all the numbers and charts of this, but just highlights, giving us a fund balance of $9.1 million, which is a strength of the town, and the reserve, because the reserve requirement's only 2.7 million. Property and sales tax are our largest sources. We'll look at the revenues in more detail, and the largest general fund program is public safety. Some footnotes, again, just to keep us all on the same page. Revenue estimates are under constant review and may change before the final adoption. In fact, even last week, we talked about how some of the grant revenues are can be tricky sometimes. They can range all the way from it's a wishful thinking grant to, you know, it's been applied for and approved and you just need to do the project. Well, we have several grants in that category where they've been applied for and approved. So I think we're okay folding those into the revenue estimates. They don't help operations so much, but they help capital projects and some of the funds. So we'll fold those into the numbers that the board will get next week, just so you're aware of that. So I talked about that second bullet point there already. Town audits, let me, as this committee is all too well aware of, we don't have the final 2021 or 2022 audits yet. The update I can give you on that is I spoke, just last week with the partner or the head of the audit firm. It's a small firm. It's a CPA who owns the firm, and then a junior CPA that so there's two CPAs and an office manager. So a small firm, and I talked to the person that owns the firm just to find out what's needed. I was having a little bit of trouble getting information, so we talked together and had a good conversation, finding out what's needed. And he did have, he was in the review stage of the financial report, and he was having trouble reconciling capital assets, governmental capital assets. The enterprise capital assets he was fine with, but there's governmental capital assets as well. You know, this building and City Hall and other assets like that. You know, you put those on a schedule and they go through a depreciation process. He was having trouble reconciling that to the books, and he's frankly short on staff. His one staff member just moved or is getting ready to move to the Washington State. Will still be with the firm, but whenever you have two people, any disruption like that can set things back or take time. So I offered to take a look at that. So he sent me those schedules, and I'm going to be looking at you know, how to reconcile the capital assets to the financial statements, because that seemed to be the last remaining issue that he was trying to clear up before he could release the 2021 statements. So just wanted to bring you up to date. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. That seemed to be the thing holding it up. And with a small firm, it doesn't take that much for there to be a little bit of a hiccup in the schedule like that. So we think I think that's a positive thing.
Are we locked into this firm for 2022?
So interesting question. We do have an agreement for 2021 and 2022. However, we talked about that. I talked about that with him as well, and we're considering we have to do an RFP soon for 2023 anyway. So we're considering doing an RFP for 2022 and 2023. And this, the owner of the firm that we have the agreement with right now was amenable to that. I mean, he admitted that with his junior accountant moving to the state of Washington, he doesn't have, and him busy for the next several months, he doesn't have coverage for this area right now anyway. So we were thinking through that, and since we have to do, we may send out the RFP for 2023 within the next week or two
Mhm.
as it is, so we're considering just doing 22 and 2023. Perhaps, a firm with more staffing resources. Yeah, not to say anything negative about our current firm, it's just it's this situation we found ourselves in, and staffing is difficult with a small firm. So good question. We are actually considering that for 2022, since we had the RFP for 2023 anyway.
And we talked about doing it for 3 years, 22,
And
23 and 24, just
possibly,
for some consistency.
yeah, 3-year
Um,
agreements are fairly common.
Yep.
And
Better,
get us some
better
places.
pricing.
Mhm.
You get better pricing, and you just there's not quite so much uptime when you start with a new auditor, because they've already got the records, and they got the permanent records, and the trial balance all settled out, and all the issues settled. So good question. We are actually seriously considering that for 2022. We talked about this last week, when I first put this slide together. We hadn't looked at the potential impacts of Proposition HH. Trustee Gator sent us a contact with the fire district, who had a contact with the county, and so through that roundabout method, I was able to work with a spreadsheet tool they have, and it looks like the potential impact from HH could be $137,000. So we'll just keep that in mind when we look at the general fund, so you have a sense for what the gravity of that would be. So it's substantial, but we're still in the black, if that helps any. And that's just an estimate based on the county assessor's office website tool. But it at least gives us something to go on.
137,000 less revenues.
In revenues, yes.
So it would eat into that 399.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
Oh, so we wouldn't have to take anything out. It would just eat into.
It would
the
eat
general-
into 399. Yeah, you wouldn't have quite as big a ending
general fund.
general fund revenues over expenses number. Yeah.
Okay, because I thought I heard that we're gonna earmark the things that we were gonna take out if we got less money. Is that not happening then?
Well,
Haven't heard anything about earmarking.
no,
In case we
we are
got
looking,
less.
we're looking at areas where we can make reductions, not necessarily related to Prop HH.
Okay, this next slide I'll go through briefly. Again, it's a definitional thing, so apologies. But I found that sometimes those that may be watching this later may not be aware of sort of the fund structure. The fund accounting is not something everybody spends a lot of time thinking about, strangely. But there are 8 funds in the town of Wellington, a general fund. That's where we spend a lot of time, because that's where all the discretionary funding is. Property tax and sales tax, as I mentioned, is 3/4 of all the revenues. The board has ability to spend that just about, within reason, just about any way they want to. Unlike the other types of funds we're going to talk about, that there are restrictions on how they can be spent. Like our 3 enterprise funds, water, sewer, and storm drainage, obviously the revenues there can only be spent on those types of purposes. These are primarily, and I make a distinction between a primarily fee-based service or fund and a primarily tax-based service or fund. Those are 2 different things. A fee-based service, to be qualified as an enterprise fund, it's meant to fund itself like a business would. Hence the word enterprise, and meant to capture all costs, operational costs, as well as capital costs, which governmental funds don't typically do. And the other definition is we use working capital in an enterprise fund. There is no such thing as a fund balance. That's a governmental fund concept. Not to get too accounting nerd here, but that's a fund balance. In an enterprise fund, you have retained earnings, like you would if you pick up a Fortune 500, financial statement, you'll see retained earnings, because they include long-term assets, long-term liabilities. But in a budget, which is mostly a cash basis thing, we use working capital, current assets minus current liabilities, as a proxy for fund balance, because it's kind of the same thing. And then we have 4 special revenue funds for streets, parks. There's a conservation trust and a library trust. These are primarily tax-based programs, but just because there are some fees in there, but just because there are some fees, like recreation fees, there's a fairly significant amount of recreation fees. But that doesn't turn that into an enterprise fund. We'll talk about the Parks Fund when we get there. It's not meant to cover all of its costs and fees, but if you can charge fees, that's an added revenue source.
Where does the money come from for streets and parks? The general fund, correct?
For streets and parks, there are some taxes that are allocated there, some portion of sales tax, there's some portion of other taxes. We'll look at that fund and so those two funds in some more depth, and they get some allocation from taxes. And fees in the case of like recreation programs. Okay, so this slide, I won't spend a lot of time on. As I told the board last week, I just wanted to put the entire town budget on one slide on one page, and I apologize, the numbers are a little overwhelming. But I wanted to start just to show what it looks like for all of the funds, general fund, the 3 enterprise funds, and the special revenue funds. I did combine the 2 trust funds. They're called trust funds. They look like special revenue funds to me because they're not actually a trust that I'm aware of, but I'm still kind of researching the form of that. But this is just a look overall. Beginning fund balance is the one thing we haven't had the advantage of for the first couple of months, was the fund balance. So that's what I've been working on mostly, is how do we get to that fund balance, which of course is taking the trial balance that's nearly audited from 2021, updating it with 2022, which is our best look at unaudited records, and then forwarding through 2023 to get us to the end of 2023. So there is some speculation in here. I'm not working with audited numbers at the moment, just so you're aware of that. But it's our best take on fund balance in each of these funds at this point in time. And then I've broken it into operations, revenues and transfers in, and expenditures and debt service and transfers out, to get a kind of a net operating number that we'll look at. We'll look at each of these funds in more detail later, and you'll see the sewer fund was running a little negative, and so is the park fund, but we'll talk about both of those. This I won't spend time on. It just it's a different way of looking at the same numbers we just looked at. Sometimes you'll see just the groupings of general fund, enterprise funds, special revenue funds, especially in the audit reports, you'll see them grouped like that. So just wanted to show a different way of grouping the numbers that we might come across from time to time. Otherwise, it's the same numbers. Okay, the general fund, we'll take a look at that. We're gonna look at revenues first. As I mentioned, sales tax and property tax are the biggest components of general fund revenues. The property tax is particularly stable. It doesn't change nearly as much. So that's a good thing to have a large portion of your tax base. Sales tax is a little more volatile, as you've probably experienced over the past several years, depending on what the economy does. And we're going to look at these revenues in several different ways, so you'll get a good feel for them. But just want to give you a sense for how the pie slices up. This is kind of a trend line look at the same numbers: property tax and sales tax over 22, 23 projected, and 2024 estimated revenues. You can see each of this is a good sign. Each of those 3 revenues showed increases for those 3 years, and the others, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. Investment earnings is up lately. We'll talk about that when we get to the numbers. And then other revenues, it kind of spiked in 2022 because of a large Main Street grant that we were able to procure. So here's the same thing, but in numbers. So property taxes went up, I think it's 18%. Got a box covering it there. Yes, 18%. And just a word or two on this. We get the updated assessed valuation from the county assessor's office, and so their projections for the increase in assessed valuation was fairly substantial this time around. So that's what's driving that 18% increase so far. You take that assessed valuation and then you apply our particular mill rate to that. Our mill rate in the current year is 13.096. If you work that out, it's like 0.00130996. So as I mentioned to the board last week, that rate is actually going to go down on its own to 12.439 in this budget year because there was a piece of debt. There's a debt service item that was built into the mill rate that's paid off in this calendar year. And so that piece of the mill rate won't show up next year. So the mill rate actually is dropping by the equivalent of 5% just because of that. So that 18% is a mixture of the assessed valuation going up and the mill rate going down.
So
Sales,
this already takes that into consideration.
It does.
Okay.
yeah, it's using 12.439, not the 13.096 that was used in 2023. Sales tax, that's 4%, or it's that's rounded, I think it's 3.8%, and we look at a number of things, especially these bigger revenues. We do a little bit more deeper dive. They're looking at Wellington's unique mixture of sales tax providers or collectors. I can't mention any names because there may be only one in a category, but we may have grocery stores, we may have fuel stations, gas stations, building materials, liquor stores, restaurants. There's lots of different categories the state will break sales tax into because they all kind of act differently depending on what's going on in the economy. So we looked at Wellington's like top 20 or so and broke them into those categories. And then the State Department of Budget prepares a very nice quarterly estimate of what revenues are looking like in the state and the economy and how sales tax look and some of the other revenues. And so that 3.8% we use for sales tax is based on our unique mix of sales tax and using the state budget office's estimates for 2024. Use tax that's a use tax for building materials. We can do a project here, like repair a roof or some kind of a project in town where building materials are bought outside of town. There's a way to capture the sales tax on those building materials and bring those to the town so that the cost of construction materials continues to go up. So there's an increase there. Franchise fees, I believe the estimate I used there was also related to the state projections. Investment earnings, I'll talk about investment earnings really quickly because it pops up from 22 actuals, 155,000 to 2023. It jumped right up, pretty much double, more than double. And that has to do, as you can imagine, interest rates have gone up a lot. The interest rates we were earning on the Colorado Trust that most of the town's resources are invested in was earning 2.2% last summer, and it's currently earning 5.5%. And so that was a good thing for the budget. It helped. Each of the fund has a piece of that. Each of the funds that has cash has a piece of that. So that helped the budget in several places. This is expenditure side now in the general funds, the proposed budget expenditures. So just to give you an idea of how that's split up in the general fund. So this doesn't include any of the special funds or enterprise funds, but the biggest pieces is the Larimer County Sheriff's Office for that public safety portion, almost a quarter. Planning is a big part of services in the general fund. Public Works Administration is in the general fund as well. Although, as I mentioned last week, the Public Works folks, much of their salaries are charged out to the enterprise funds. And so if you account for that, the Public Works slice is really more like 9% instead of 15%. And we will talk about overhead in a few slides as well. The libraries in the general fund, of course, and then you have all the administrative services too.
So I thought we were told that Public Works was the biggest department. Was that just in personnel? But obviously it's not in expenses.
It is if you include the portion here that's in the general fund, which is the administrative side of Public Works. It's the director and the deputy director and several other positions that make up the administrative side. That gets charged out to water and sewer and storm drain. But the positions that are actually in the field, your distribution and collection positions, your plant operator positions at both water and sewer. Those are not in the general fund. Those are actually budgeted in those funds. So what we try to do is just put administrative like positions in the general fund, but those that impact, like finance, some of finance is charged out to the enterprise funds, so is the public works overhead. So they would have the biggest budget if you include all of the funds.
That's a good example. The engineers are all in this public works admin fund, and most of the engineers are almost 100% paid for out of the 4 funds that we manage, the infrastructure funds, water, streets, drainage, and sewer.
And they do have the most employees.
Okay, that's where the
Yeah.
comment came from. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Okay. General fund, we talk a little bit more specifically, so this is one of the big number charts again, but just specifically the general fund. So maybe I'll start at near the bottom there, the revenues over expenditures for each of these 3 years is projected to be in the black, so that's a good sign. Therefore, you see the ending fund balance increasing by that amount each year to the $9.1 million I talked about earlier. So I'll start with that because it's a good news point. I mean, the general fund has a healthy fund balance. The reserve requirement under the board's policy is 2.7 million. So that's kind of your last stopgap, for the town is what's available there in the general fund. So that's a good solid point to have there. We have revenues, we have transfers. That transfer line, I'll explain, there's a few slides in a little bit. You can see it's jumped around a bit. In 2022, we handled overhead one way. In 2023, we handled it a little different way. And then we've got it yet another way that we think is better in 2024. And then we'd like to stay consistent. Accountants like consistency. So this was challenging for all of us, but that's where we were.
So it's not the same as 2022, you're saying? Because it says transfers, are we not doing the same thing as 2022?
It's similar
Similar.
it's similar in concept, and I've got several slides, so
Okay.
we'll walk through the whole thing. It's similar in concept, but a little bit different. You can see because the amounts are different as well.
Okay.
Then we have expenditures, operating expenditures. Again, those jump around because of how the overhead was handled. Because for instance, in 2023, positions like in finance were directly budgeted for in the enterprise and special funds. They weren't budgeted for in the general fund, so it looks like it was spended less in the general fund. And we'll go over that as well. We have one thing we told the board last week, and we'll talk about this when we get to the special funds, but you'll see in the sewer fund there, we're actually recommending, this is a new thing in the 2023, a budget amendment for that $334,000. The general fund can assist enterprise funds up to 10% of the enterprise fund revenues under Colorado state law. And so that's what that $334,000 is, 10% of operating revenues to help that fund out. And you'll see when we get there that's the need for that. But just wanted to point that out on this slide. So generally good news here. Wanted to highlight that.
So Prop HH could have an impact on the revenue.
Yes, it could reduce that revenue line item, which would reduce the bottom line.
So
The
the 399.
399 would drop and the ending fund balance would drop.
When we initially talked about Prop HH, nobody knew what that amount looked like. I mean, I was provided horror stories of it's gonna be $500,000, it's gonna be $1 million. So there was a time that I think we talked about, to your question, earmarking some reductions in relation to Prop HH. And now that it's $137,000, it's like, let's just wrap it into the other reductions that we're looking at, as opposed to earmarking it just because of Prop HH.
Makes sense. More information now.
Okay, so let's talk about overhead a little bit. And like everyone in this room, probably, I'm hoping we can get to a place where we decide on a method for allocating overhead, because allocating overhead is a legitimate thing. I mean, enterprise funds and other funds that use, the whole concept is for those haven't thought through it a lot like all of us in here have. The whole concept is that the general fund provides services. If you're the water fund, say you were a separate water districts, there are separate water districts by themselves. They have to have a finance service of some kind, usually a finance person, some HR services, whether that's contracted out or in-house, or IT contracted out or in-house. They have to provide those services. So the concept here is the general fund houses all these administrative services, plus the administration of the Public Works Department itself. How does that get charged out to the funds that are using those services? It's done by every position in the city is put on a schedule, and we have a copy for everyone, I believe, right, Stephanie?
Ross gonna print them, I totally forgot.
Gonna print them out, okay. So we're gonna print you out a schedule just like this. It's every position in the city, front and back. And it shows the percentage of that position and which fund that goes to. So like, the finance director, if we had one, where is it? 25% water fund, 25% sewer fund, 5% drainage, 30% general fund, and so forth. This was an analysis that was done, what did we think, a couple of years ago?
Yes, Longfellow did that, was it 2 years ago, year and a half ago?
Almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Almost 2 years ago.
So we're about due.
So it's the sort of thing that every 3 years or so, you probably want to update to make sure it still makes sense. But we'll give you a copy of this, because this shows how every position in the town is split. And it's like you might think. For instance, on the back here are all the library positions, all 100% general fund. We value the library positions. Oh, he's gone. But we're not going to charge, a librarian out to the water fund or the sewer fund. That doesn't make sense. And in some positions, like we talked about the engineers, they would be charged out a lot to the water and the sewer funds.
Okay.
Whereas, other positions that don't interact as much with those funds would be charged out less. So you'll see that breakdown. That's how the numbers were generated here. We take the salaries and the benefits using these percentages, and it tells us how much to charge to each of the different funds. So this number here for 2024 is looking at the general fund's perspective of it. Transfers to the general fund in 2024. $260,000 comes each in from the water and sewer, and then from the other funds, streets. So water and sewer, that direct part, that is the public works positions we mentioned earlier, the engineers and the director and deputy director of those positions. We consider that direct because they're more related to the water and sewer funds. The indirect would be me and.
But didn't we just say that they were already under the water fund?
So water plant operators
Okay.
and wastewater plant operators they're budgeted there.
Okay.
As our distribution and collection staff that actually work on the lines, they are there. The positions that are more, it's a bit of a judgment call, but the positions that are more administrative overhead, you could argue if an engineer, works mainly with water and sewer, maybe they should be there too. So there's some judgment call here. But that's how it got split up, is that if you're a plant operator or a distribution collection staff member, then you're in the water and sewer fund. Otherwise, you're charged there this way.
Right.
And then the indirect for each of the funds, that would be the water fund pay, and we'll the next slide, maybe just go to the next slide. You see that water, $307,645. So this is the perspective of the water fund, just as an example. We won't go through every fund, but as an example, the water fund gets a bill, so to speak, for $568,000 in overhead. $260,000 of that is for the engineers and the department, management. And then as a water operation, they get charged these amounts for those different services provided, like they were a separate district and had to go out and get their own finance and IT and human resources, and that sort of held.
So what does streets have to do with water plant?
That's why they're here.
Definitely, we don't have like 5 people to do one job, right? We all do multiple jobs here, so there's people in the streets unit or group that also help out with various things on the water and sewer side. So we tried to get this to reflect what people actually do in real life as much as we could.
Thank you.
So that's the general fund side, that's the, the side of the water fund as one example. And then just to test your patience just a little bit more, I wanted to throw one more slide in here, just to show the difference between 2023, for instance, and 2024. So this is the administrative overhead pieces, all these administrative functions. In the general fund, you see, administration, finance, city clerk, human resources, etc. In 2023, the budget in the current year, the budget for those items was $1.8 million. That's because a large portion was actually budgeted for in the special funds. In 2024, all of finance, and this is partly why we did it. I kind of view it as a transparency thing. If somebody wants to know what finance costs, they should be able to go to the finance division in the general fund and see all of the finance positions and what the cost of that is, salaries and benefits and everything else. So we brought all of those back into the general fund. So obviously the general fund piece went way up. It's now $3.8 million, $3.9 million. But at the bottom, I show the administrative overhead coming in. And when you net them out, you go from 1.8 million to 2 million. And that's partly the merit and COLA increase, and it's partly there's a couple of new positions in the general fund that are being requested. So I just hope it doesn't make it more confusing, but I just wanted to show that in 2023, we did it differently. Positions in the general fund weren't all budgeted in the general fund. Some were, $135,000 worth of salary and benefits were budgeted for in the finance department, for instance. The rest of it was directly budgeted in water and sewer and storm drain and other funds. Now, if you look at 2024, all of the finance department is budgeted there. Same with the other departments. And then at the bottom, you see the overhead coming in. So we feel like it's a more direct and transparent way of showing it. This is a really common approach to use that other towns use to show this sort of overhead procedure. But so hopefully it's not overdoing it, but I wanted to show you that piece.
So these 2024 proposed numbers are what we're gonna see later, but I looked through and like finance, it's 300,000, not 400,000.
Are you looking at wages or wages and benefits?
Oh, wages and benefits.
Yeah, just trade.
I just looked at wages. Thank you. That's the difference.
Sure, since in our system here, we just allocate out wages and benefits, and not to alarm anyone, but the more common approach is to actually allocate out all operating expenses, not just wages and benefits, but you would take the entire department and allocate that out. We've not done that here, so I'm not proposing changing that methodology here. That would be much more expensive to the other funds.
Okay.
So just trying to give you a feel for what you might commonly see elsewhere. But yeah, this is it is wages and benefits, if not other operating costs.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're just a few more slides. If you bear with me, we're going to talk about the individual funds, and I'll point out a few key things here as we go along. We start with the street fund. So the first thing I'll point out is that you see revenues over expenditures in 2024 is a minus almost $1 million. So that's alarming. However, one thing we talked about last week is that the town has been really quite good at procuring grant revenues, particularly for capital projects. And there's quite a bit of dollars in the street area that I did not, again, to be conservative, I did not fold that into that revenue number you see there for 2024. But we're going to do that in an updated version because we have several grants that are in the accepted and awarded, stage, which is good enough to include in your. So that number will be much different when we look at that next, because of the size of the grants that we have in the street fund.
So the revenue will increase.
The revenue
From what
will
we see
increase,
here.
right, and our
Okay.
revenue over expense will go way down I don't know if it'll go away. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it'll go way down. So I wanted to point that out. This is kind of call it a worst case scenario. If we wanted to do all those projects, could we fund it from fund balance? And it turns out we could, but because your town staff has done a great job procuring grants, we won't have to fund it all from fund balance. So wanted to point out that positive piece there.
What's the reserve requirement?
The reserve requirement here is 25%. Yeah, it's got that written down. I have the actual number written down here. Let me find it. Streets, yes. Reserve requirement is $328,000. So that's more like, I think it must be 33%. I get the two mixed up. So 33% of that $995,000. So we're way over the, even taking that $1.9 million in capital projects. And by the way, they're all good capital projects. I mean, that's a lot of downtown stuff. That's Cleveland Avenue improvements. And so really good projects. But even with that 1.9 million, you're still at 3.3 million, and you've got a $328,000 reserve requirement. So this is one of your healthier funds. And once we factor in the grants, it'll be even better. So see, I'll try to say the good when there is good. Okay, so now let's talk about water. I've got a couple slides for water because water is a little bit unique in that we have incorporated into one fund kind of three separate things, three separate reserves, I'll call them. You have water operations, just day-to-day operating your water program. You have the raw water impact fee that's collected for purchasing water rights when needed. And then you have the tap fee, or the impact fee for growth-related projects. We here in the town put those all into one fund. You'll very often see special revenues like impact fees in a fund of their own, so you can track easily what's coming in and what they're being used for. Okay, this is all in one fund. That's not that you can't do it that way. It works fine. You just have to be really careful about documenting it and tracking it. In our case, this was done about 4 years ago. Whoever was the finance person back then did a deep dive analysis breaking out those three funds. I took that 4-year-old data and rolled it forward. What are the revenues collected for tap fees, for raw water, for operations? What were the expenditures that came out of there for growth-related projects, for water purchases? To come up with new balances. I'll show you that in the next slide, but just wanted to point out that the water fund is, and that's important to know also, because when you do a rate study, you know, the rates for water usage are different from the rates for tap fees. So it's important to break it out for that purpose. Let's see if there's anything important to say here. Well, obviously, I mean, the big number here, revenues over expenditures in the water fund, minus $15 million. That sounds pretty dramatic, but this is sort of the last stages of the big water plant project. You'll see something similar in the wastewater fund as well. So, you know, the timing of when the loan proceeds come in versus when the project is being built, it's not like a $15 million operating loss. It's just the way the cash flowed that year. I will say, however, that in the water fund, there was, you know, the loan was not sufficient to cover the entire cost of the plant. So some of that, you know, does come from fund balance and from other sources. And let's talk about that. This next slide does what I said. That fund balance on the far right side there, that's the same numbers as you saw in the previous slide. But we've broken that $3.2 million. So that, you know, the good news is the water fund had $3.2 million in fund balance. And the reserve requirement is 1.1 million. So there's another good news piece. The reserve requirement that the board said is 1.1 million, we're at 3.2 million, so positive so far.
You read my mind, I was trying to find.
We lost our PowerPoint.
Oh. Says I'm still sharing. Oh, there you go. Thank you. So that's the good news. You look at the fund as a whole, and that's important because for debt service covenants and things like that, you know, that's helpful to look at the fund like as a whole like that, and you can do that. However, for the purposes of understanding what's going on in the fund and for rate setting purposes and what have you, we broke that back out into what's happening with the impact fee, what's happening with the raw water reserve, and what's happening with operations. So when you look at it that way, operations starts, you can see that column with a minus $883,470 in beginning fund balance for 2024. I will say, for what it's worth, you know, it wasn't programmed that way originally because this was such a wet year in 2023. The revenues for water usage have been estimated downwards quite a bit. In fact, almost $1 million downwards, $965,000, I think, if I remember it right. It's great to have a wet year. We're all happy about that. There's many good reasons. Nobody's arguing that, but it does have an impact on revenues. People don't use as much water when you have a wet year. So had it not been for that, we would have been closer to breaking even, you know, at the end of last year and starting this year more broken even. But that's the nature of the business. Is some years are going to do that. So that's the operations side of it, and I'll talk about that loan line there in just a minute. But as you can see, with operations minus there and revenues of $6.3 million estimated in that year, and then a loan. Well, I'll talk about it now. A loan from the raw water fund in order to balance out the ending balance for the operations reserve and the impact fee reserve. This is a stopgap measure, we'll call it, to borrow from the raw water reserve. It's not borrowing from another fund. It's within the fund. But again, to keep track of these different sources, that would be borrowing from the raw water fund in operations and in impact fee. And then if you just follow the numbers down, we have transfers out for capital projects and the impact fee, that's to finish the plant. And then we have dollars set aside should a raw water purchase come up. I think $2.5 million of that is so we have appropriated dollars should an opportunity come up. And then you end up with, you know, slightly positive in the impact fee, slightly positive in operations, and then the raw water fee still has $2.9 million, and that's how you get to the $3.2 million. Now let me give you one exciting update to this that we'll talk about with the board next week, but just as a teaser, we'll call it. We've been working hard with our water and sewer rate consultants as well. And what I factored in here, as you can see in the operations side, was I had debt service in the operations side, pulling from operations dollars. Our water rate consultants, who are, you know, engineers, so smart people, they had that pulling from the impact fee reserve, because the idea being there, you know, a growth plant opportunity like that, building a plant like that for potential future growth. We were pulling whatever wasn't funded by the debt. We were pulling that from there. But then the loan itself, the repayment of the loan, that could also be paid for by tap fees. So the next version of this, what that essentially does is it moves the debt service out of the operation side and moves it into the impact fee side. And so the operation side doesn't need a loan anymore, but the impact fee side needs, you know, twice the loan. It's $6 million instead of, you know, so hope that's not, too confusing. It was a big enough change. I wanted to at least bring that up, since we were just, learning about that recently. And we'll get that all together and, talk to the board, next week as we talk about the budget updates as well as water and sewer rates.
So does that mean that the residents' water rates don't need to increase, but the developer's impact fee needs to increase? Is that the takeaway?
I wouldn't put it quite like that. I mean, the plan that's coming forward has rate increases for both water and tap fees, and we'll go over that in quite some depth. When we get together next week. So I did.
This,
yeah, I would.
this revenue under operations already assumes some increase.
5%.
Okay.
Oh, that's good
Yeah.
to know.
Lose 5%. Correct. For water rates, 4% for tap fees. Is what's built in here.
5%.
Wow.
4% tap fees. Okay, so we'll have an updated slide for next week and just serendipitously talking about water and sewer rates at the same time. So the two presentations will kind of go hand in hand a little bit because we'll be talking about the same numbers. So a lot more there, but I just wanted to share that exciting change up front. Just couldn't keep it in.
And now that the impact fee is more negative, 3 million more in the hole, does that mean that that 4% will have to be adjusted?
That's an option.
What are other options?
I think next week would be a good time to talk through that when we can look at the whole
Picture?
picture, the whole program. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't come prepared to talk about all.
But
the options.
basically, this won't show as a negative because you're transferring just the 6 million instead of, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's all within the same fund. Yeah.
No,
So the-
it's more of a loan than a transfer.
Correct. Yes.
The
Well,
money was taken in to buy raw water.
yeah. Well said. We view it as a loan. I mean, I'll put loan in quotes because it's all within the same fund. So it just needs to be well documented. In fact, in the rate plan that we're looking at, we would propose a time schedule to pay that back.
Got it.
I mean, not, don't just leave it like there's 6 million always there that,
Alright.
that's always owed. I mean, that's a very good point that it was collected for the raw water purposes. And so it does need to have a reasonable payback schedule for that to make sense.
So the bottom right-hand number, the 3.2, that stays the same even though we're moving this other stuff around.
It stays the same. This is really us trying to make as transparent as we can the separate pieces within the fund. For our own purposes, because impact fees and raw water can only be used for certain things, as if they were their own funds. But also for rate setting purposes, it's important to know the differences between them.
I appreciate you doing that. That's really nice.
Certainly, yeah, and we just need to keep it up annually rather than quadrannually or whatever it is, and we'll be okay. The fund does end with $3.2 million. And we'll talk about this next week in a lot more detail, but there are debt service coverage challenges in both the water fund and the sewer fund. Because the debt service pieces are substantial. You see $1.46 million in the water fund, and it's higher than that by quite a bit in the sewer fund. So the way our loan agreements with the state go is you take debt service times 110%, and you take operating expenditures, including overhead expenditures, and then you need to have operating revenues that cover that, and we don't currently. We missed that. You'll see that next week. But in the water fund, we missed that slightly. In the sewer fund, a little bit more. And we'll go over that in some detail next week, but I just, again, telling you the good with the bad, is I'm glad we have a good fund balance there, and I'm glad we're meeting our fund balance reserves. But there are challenges with debt service coverage that we'll talk about in more depth next week, sure. Okay, water fund. Sewer fund is, and I mentioned this to the board last week, it's a similar situation in that there is an impact fee here, however, a similar study 4 years ago was not done, at least that I've been able to find, separating out the sewer fund from the operations. So that's a study I still need to do, but for now, you're just seeing the two combined. So I don't have a separate slide for this one, but that it was, I think it was maybe more important, the water fund, because there was 3 sources there, but we'll do the same thing for the sewer fund. It just, we didn't have time to do that up to this point anyway. So let's see, beginning balances. So revenues, transfers in, we transferred in 390,000 in 2022. We're proposing for 2023 another 334,000. And just to be straight up, that transfer in allows us to end with $455,000 at the end, which more than meets our reserve requirement.
Oh, is that the reason? Reserve requirement?
Yeah. But not our debt service coverage requirement, so
But is that the maximum allowed by?
that 334,000, yeah, it's 10% of the number above it,
Okay.
which is what was allowed. that year.
It would be $700 more.
We can some wiggle there.
It's gonna save us that $700.
But in 2022, we did more than 10%, looks like. 390, 2.9.
So what was, how the year ended up versus how it was budgeted, or how we thought it was gonna be when that number was determined, it might have been a difference.
Oh.
Yeah, because that's an actual year.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, 2023, we don't know for sure that 334 is gonna be the right number.
So we go up based on budgeted number. We should budget higher then. Just kidding.
So sewer fund, so again, the loan proceeds are quite heavy. They're a large 2 loans in total. They were $48.5 million. So we do have enough loan funds for that plant. But the debt service is quite large, $2.5 million in 2024. So that makes the debt service coverage in that fund, again, we'll go over this next week, but that makes that challenging. I talked a little bit about that last week. Because the loan agreements with the state do say, if your coverage isn't what it should be, then they have a series of events that need to happen. And I was hoping it would tell me you had years to figure it out or fix it. And you don't. You're supposed to fix it in the next year. And I'll go over that time frame next week to be more precise. But we're gonna talk to the state, because very often, as long as you're making your debt service payments, and as long as you have a plan for pulling out, then very often they're more than willing to work with you. So we haven't talked to the state yet. We're gonna do that, and we'll bring back that information next week as well. Okay, so this fund, as we'll talk about next week, this fund and the water fund are the big challenges. One thing I didn't mention for the water fund, of course, if I can mention it, the North Cruder payment is the thing that's really driving that. In the sewer fund, the debt service payment is driving a lot of the sewer fund. And there is debt in the water fund as well, but it's that North Cruder payment. If that were to change, if that were to negotiate set differently, it changes the picture there completely. But that's nothing we can budget in.
Is that the 2.6?
2.6, I think it's for
the North Booter?
I think it was 2.7 in 2024.
It was 2.6 this last
It
year,
was 2.6 and 23,
22.
yes.
We don't have 23 yet.
Yes, that's what we're paying it now.
Yeah, we're
We're
paying
paying 22.
2022 now,
20,
2.6, yeah, it's budgeted for 2.7 in 2024.
Mhm.
And so that's the large driver. I mean, that's
So I had a question, because I know we had the revenue decrease for water because it's a wet year. I know the
Yeah.
correspondence won't be the same, but we should also see a decrease in the North Cooter bill as well from budgeted because we won't be purchasing the amount of water. Is that a correct statement? We just don't know how much it'll be because
I think that's true.
rates could shoot through the roof.
Yes,
Yes, for 2023, that's true.
Okay, so hopefully we'll see, again,
but I would caution that the unit cost that we pay will still increase.
Yes.
Over what we paid last year.
yes, the unit cost will go up because of rates of
And everything else.
everything else, but the amount of water that we buy will be less because it's been a wet year.
Correct.
Hopefully,
Which is nice.
yeah,
Little bit of a silver lining.
The savings won't offset.
no, I know. It'd be nice if they were 1-for-1.
So 2023 water, we get billed in 24, or do we get billed this year for
We
it?
should receive the invoice in the middle of next month.
So even in the,
Bill to end of next month.
they
Because
just
it's
project,
billed, no, it's billed based on the water year, which runs from November 1 through October 30th,
oh, perfect,
or 31st, I guess.
Okay.
So 31 days in
but
October.
it's our 2023. Okay, cool.
Just two slides left. I believe we have the drainage fund. I'm trying to look for something to point out here. I guess one thing I'll point is a negative as well, but some of the grants that we'll be factoring in do apply to drainage capital projects as well. So I'm hoping to see that number, that negative number also look better next time around.
Because we included them in the capital projects, but not in the revenue.
Grant funded projects are included in capital projects, but I'm not included in the revenue
Got
in the slide, correct? And leaves us with again, a kind of a worst case scenario, you could do the projects and still have $1 million. Slides here, ready, find the drainage fund. Yeah, so the reserve requirement there is only $121,000, so we're in good shape there.
Let me go back one slide just for one last question on the sewer fund. It's supposed to be done next year, right? The construction.
Mhm.
So we'll start to see it settle down going forward. Like there won't be as many.
Yeah.
Loan proceeds
Yeah.
and. Capital.
Correct, yeah, and very often, this is a little unusual, very often, very large projects like that are set up and they're like their own separate capital projects fund. Especially when you have loan proceeds and other funding sources coming in, so it's a little unusual. I suggested if we have large projects in the future, maybe they would be in their own capital projects fund. It's a little bit easier to see that way rather than mixing them in with operations and that sort of thing. But again, anything is workable as long as you document it well and keep it up to date. It's manageable. So this works. Drainage. So I think I was saying just worst case scenario, even if we didn't have grants, we'd end up with $1 million and yeah, so this is a good fund too, and grants will help that. And then finally, last slide is the park fund. I wanted to talk about this one just a little bit like I did last week. I'll not carry on too much here, but a park fund. We talked about this last week. I was a little surprised to see park operations, Parks and Rec in its own fund. Whenever you see a fund like this and you see a minus 688,000 in this year, the first thing you think is, oh, wow, why isn't that paying for itself, or like it was an enterprise fund or something. Parks and Rec is not an enterprise fund. This is a special revenue fund. It has tax revenues and recreation fees coming in to fund it. But we happen to have a larger capital projects year, that $300,000, that helped drive that number. But it just, this is not as big a red flag for me as maybe some of the stuff we talked about in the water and sewer fund to see a negative here, because very often Parks and Rec budget is just in the general fund, like the library is. You know, it's a service provided to citizens, mostly tax funded, some fees, you know, just to help out the budget. So that's just my comments there. Even with that, there's still $1.5 million remaining in that budget, and let's see, $472,000 reserve requirement, so we're well above that.
So can we put money from the general fund into the revenue of this fund?
So it sort of is, I mean, we have 1% of the sales tax is allocated between streets and parks,
Right.
and that percentage. Can split differently, so. Sales tax revenues, which in many places do go to the general fund, are specifically split out into this fund, so that's part of the funding source there is sales tax.
We put additional general fund money in it.
You could, because this is not an enterprise fund, so you don't have the same kind of restrictions there.
So if we
It's-
get low on the fund balance, we can put more general fund money in.
You could. Yes,
So is
For
the
special
debt
requirement.
service, kind of to that point, is the debt service, is it worth carrying debt? In this one?
that's a fair question. Again, for a tax-based service like this, you don't set fees at recreation programs to say, well, I'm gonna cover my $300,000 capital program, and I'm gonna cover my $252,000 in debt service. No, you set fees. Fees don't even cover usually just the direct costs of riding class, because it's a benefit to
Right.
the citizens. That's what they're there for. So, yeah, and we've set it up here to show it like it's nearly paying for itself. It's debt service, it's capital projects, it's overhead, everything. So it's kind of set up like an enterprise fund. And so all I wanted to add is that it's fine to set it up that way. But for a program like recreation, you're gonna see negatives from time to time if you have a bigger capital program like this.
And I don't disagree with that at all. I think it is a service that, the valley should provide. That being said, is it worth carrying debt though? Could we reduce that end fund balance more, pay off the debt,
Oh,
stop paying interest?
oh.
There's so much left over.
Is there a point in
So-
having debt?
I mean, we have to be able to fund paying that off. It was a $2.8 million loan to begin with a few years ago. The balance now is,
Okay. So
Uh,
this
it's
is
still-
just what we have to pay.
that's the annual debt
This
service
year.
on
Gotcha.
what started out as a $2.8 million loan, and we're several years into it. So I can't remember off the top of my head what the payoff is, but it's still substantial. So that cash would have to come from somewhere.
I got it. Okay.
And I would suggest kind of conserving our cash.
Yeah.
At the moment, if we have a loan like
It's a
that.
lovely idea, though.
I was misunderstanding
Yeah.
this to be like, this is the loan balance.
Oh, no, that's the debt service
That's-
on the loan balance.
that's
Yeah, that's
1
principal
year.
and principal interest 1 year.
Got it.
And is this
Yeah.
for a community park? That loan?
The financial statement note did not say what the original loan was for. Does anybody?
Well, community
Well,
park.
yeah, that's what we're talking about.
It's WCP. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, that
That
was
was
taken out in the early teens, I think.
I think the
Mid-teens.
mid-teens, 2016 sounds right, yeah, yeah. that
And
sounds
how
good.
many year loan?
I feel like it was 15. So, yeah, we're halfway through. So the payoff would still be. It was substantial. Feel like it was over $1 million. I can't remember. So. Yeah, I think the interest rate was reasonable, so I suggest holding on to it. That's
Yeah,
that's service for.
that makes sense.
Can we pull together, at least for the trustees, and the finance committee wants just a list of all of the loans that we have for the town?
Sure.
Therefore.
Yeah,
So I mean, I see things there and I'm like, what loan is that?
Yep.
I
absolutely. We actually have a whole.
would assume there's somewhere it exists.
As soon as we present the finance committee and the board with an audited financial statement, we have a whole section in the financial statement. There's a note to the financial statement that lists all the debts
Okay.
and the amount outstanding. So, yeah, that we will provide, I mean, we'll provide it with the 2021 audited report, but we can pull something together,
Mhm.
before that. And that was my last slide. Thank you for sitting through that a second time, many of you.
I learn something new each time.
Happy to answer any more.
I do have a question about the water fund, because we were in a world of hurt with the 3 million loan, but now it's not there anymore, so that's great. I was wondering if we can reduce expenses by delaying any CIP projects. That would reduce some of our costs.
We've been doing that kind of continuously.
You know, if I remember correctly, I don't have this VIP in front of me, but I don't, for 2024, there's not a significant number. The project is still underway.
Right, there's about 500,000 that I don't think are part of the
So
project.
we've got, I'm looking at it right now, Wilson Wall improvements is $30,000. Automated metering infrastructure, 228,000, rehabilitating the water tanks, 1.1 million. Pre-treatment facility site improvement, 65,000. SCADA telemetry system upgrades, 40,000. Programmable logic controllers, 105,000.
So the bulk of that, so the water tank, we know that's been rolled into this year. So that's taken off the 2024 budget, except for what we roll over from the 23 budget. The automated metering infrastructure piece will be an expenditure that's only realized if we are awarded the grant that we're pursuing right now. So if we're not awarded that grant, that project will extend, lesser dollar amount happening over more years. So those are the two biggest things that you mentioned. The Wilson Well House improvements were under some direction from our SURSA coverage for some health, some safety improvements that need to take place at that. That's what that $30,000 is for. We have the programmable logic controllers that's we touched on with, I remember Trustee Wiegand asking those questions. We have 4 PLCs that are in existing plant operation utilization that are at the end of their useful life, meaning they're no longer supported and you can't get parts for them or repair them any longer. We're trying to get that, set up to where we don't fail and then have a failure. And then the telemetry upgrades, that's what produces our communication ability between our in-town treatment unit and our main wastewater treatment facility. So that allows us to communicate back and forth and operate that remotely. And we suffer some pretty heavy issues with wind. And we're trying to upgrade that so we can maintain, because if we lose it, communication, then we have to shut the system down because we can't read if it's treating properly and putting the right dosing in. And so then that's our cheap water. It's our free water essentially. So we're trying to keep that functioning around the clock for the whole year. And I think, and then there was the improvements at the pretreatment site to cover the expanded property that we now own finally. So we can utilize that. So it's a expansion of the security fencing and then expanding some grading on that site so we can utilize that facility and it not just be sitting there for one of our neighbors to grade their cattle on, which is currently how it's utilized.
We've deleted a few projects,
We have.
as you know, to pay for other things to date. And pushed we had to value engineer the administration building out of the water plant. And so we pushed that out into future years and as you guys know, it's, because we're spending this big chunk of money now on the construction, but the fund balance is just going to tend to meander upwards after that. We don't have those gigantic expenses. So the idea is to push them out to the point where we can absorb them.
Well, that's my next question is, some years are lower than others on the CIP total. And so when we're adjusting water rates, do we take into account over the years? So it goes up and it goes down. And so we don't want to collect too much and then the CIP goes down.
Right.
Okay, so that's all taken into account. Okay, great. My only other question is just on the details, not on your presentation, but on the salary details. The projected 2023 and the budgeted are the same numbers in every category. Which just, I guess, does that mean we don't have projected numbers?
So we got that input last week as well. It's a good one. So when we asked the departments for the projections for the end of the year, this was like back in was back in August, I think it
End of
was.
July, first of
And
August.
so we didn't have, very much of the year at that point in time. So, just recently asked for, sent out through September, data and asked for best projections for the end of the year, so we can get that updated. Because it was a little early maybe to ask that question last time, but, we've done that, recently. No.
Good news, bad news for the enterprise funds, because we've been pretty stable. We haven't really had a lot of turnover, which is great news. But that prevents salary savings from occurring as well. So
And we're looking at that as well, just so the committee is aware. We'll call it, fine tuning. It's fairly common in budgeting to budget a position, even if it's vacant, for the full year, as if it's cost for the full year, or if it's a new position, budgeting it for the full year. But what we're gonna do is take a look at those positions that we know for 2023 were vacant, and for 2024, like just as an example, the finance director position, we know isn't gonna start on January 1. Sometime in the months that come after that, but there'll be some period of months where I've got a budget for a full finance director position for that year. But if that position doesn't start until March, April, May, so, anywhere in there, then there's some savings there. And so very often you budget for the full amount as a conservative measure, and then at the end of the year, you realize some budget savings, and it's a happy time. But when things are tight, sometimes it's best to do your best estimate of those savings upfront, so that we've got that accounted for. So we've asked all the departments to look at that as well. Significant vacancies, not every short one perhaps, but significant vacancies for positions they know are going to be open, and so we can factor that cost savings in there as well.
So the salaries are supposed to be up to 6% increase, yet the 2022 numbers, the 2023 numbers, and the 2024, it's way above 6%. There's a discrepancy with the numbers when no positions are added.
Between 2023 and 2024.
And 2022, because 2022, we had the transfers and not the allocated, but it's still not 6% difference.
Between 2022, I'd have to have a specific example between 2023 and 2024.
So like here, admin for 2022 salaries was 340,000. For 2024 salaries, it's 582,000, which is an increase of 71%. And that's with a transfer year. I don't think we're adding anything in 2024.
Say that again, admin.
Admin is 340,000 for 2022.
Correct.
And then 2024, it's 582. So that's a 71% increase. So it's just not jiving. I don't understand what the difference is, what the discrepancy is.
So the difference between 2023 and 2024 is the way we handled
Right, the allocations.
the allocation differently. And
Correct.
2023, part of those salaries would have been, salaries and benefits would have been spread out to the other funds. For 2022, I'd have to look at that, what the difference. I didn't
What-
have that far.
Because we're using 2024, we're using this, right, to break out.
Mhm.
So was this also used in 2022?
Something similar-ish. I don't think it was exact.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
general idea was used.
So it's the way the transfers were allocated in 22 and the way they're being done in 24 are different, which is resulting in.
But this number should be not different. The number all is in the department and then they transfer that money out. So it's all in there. It should all be in there. All the positions should be in that department.
For 2024.
For 24.
That's
And,
correct.
and 2 and 4.
Yeah, I haven't studied 2022 as closely, but there was a overhead allocation scheme process that year too.
There
So
was.
I'd
Oh,
have to, yeah,
that's a
Yeah.
discrepancy I was
Yeah.
asking about. Okay,
Yeah,
so that would explain.
there was an it was a different, it was slightly different, but I just have to say, I haven't studied that year
Okay,
as closely, so I'm not sure why that number is the way it is. I know why 2024 is so much higher than
Right,
2023.
because of the allocated thing.
Because
Yeah.
it was allocated in 2023. I know there was a overhead allocation system in 2022 as well. I'm just not as familiar with it.
I can tell you, one of the things that might be causing that is in past years, there was a budgeted transfer, but it was kind of reconciled at the end of the year to account for savings. So if a position was vacant for half the year, the actual transfer was only half of the budgeted amount of transfer, which tends to make. So since it's kind of conservative, it's always going to be lower for past years.
Okay, that makes sense, because these are actuals and versus budgeted, not budgeted versus budgeted. Okay,
Good point, good point.
thank you for that.
Good point.
And the only other thing is, remember how I mentioned in Cassell, the budgeted numbers were incorrect at one of our, finance committee meetings. In the enterprise fund, there's still the incorrect, not approved budgeted amount for salaries and wages. So it just still needs to be corrected.
Okay, just an enterprise fund.
Just
you
the
found that?
enterprise
Okay.
funds needs to be corrected, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
I know you had submitted an email question. Did that get answered as well?
It was overhead,
overhead,
yes,
okay.
that was great. That's the only thing, and then my, benefit questions,
Benefits,
yeah.
you got that.
Okay.
Excellent.
So all
you.
questions have been answered that were submitted. Any other questions? In
Just
the
for
room.
reference, the budgeted number from 2022 for wages and salaries.
For which one?
This is administrative, was 475,937 was the budgeted number for 2022.
For 20,
475,937. But it came in at 340.
got it.
Oh, okay.
So when you're looking at the budgeted, it was budgeted at 497, but it came in at 340, so it came in about 100
And that's the cost
30,000
savings
under.
from the vacant positions. So on and so forth.
Which then makes it an increase of 22%, 22 through 24.
You'd
Just-
expect 6% per year. So it's a little high,
That's a little high.
Isn't there also add to staff?
not in 23, because the
No, but
22,
in 24.
Mm-mm.
not in administrative.
No,
no.
okay.
There's added in public works, planning, library and parks. And
Isn't-
LCSO,
Okay.
but not administrative.
I'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at it. Yeah.
Any other questions, discussion, anything from Sarah? All right, well,
I think all of
thank,
the questions got answered.
good, awesome, thank you. And thank you, Dawn, for that very descriptive revision. Much appreciated. So we will move into reports. And Christine, any reports?
No.
Sarah?
No, I don't have anything.
Unfortunately, I forgot to bring it with me, but we did receive a proclamation at the last trustee meeting from the mayor and the trustees for finance. Committee finance, Department of Finance week, finance and accounting week.
Finance and accounting.
Money maker.
This guy was so happy.
So,
First time ever.
I got
All these
you there, I got
years.
you there. So I do have a copy of the proclamation to share with the,
You emailed it to us.
yes, I did, I took a picture and emailed it out.
That's great.
I don't know, I'm gonna do it, frame it, put it in my office.
Oh,
There you go.
So, but thanks to the trustees and the mayor for that recognition. I don't have anything else. Trustee Gator?
No, just appreciate any input you guys have as a finance committee. Again, if you come up with things throughout the budget, feel free to send those either to staff, to myself, to the whole board, doesn't really matter how you get the information. Really do want to get the input. Budget bonanza is tomorrow. I know we're having a trustee booth. I know I don't know how many of us will be
I
here,
think
but,
you and trustee Mason,
okay, woohoo,
I'm still waiting to hear back from trustee Daly.
all right, so, but we'll,
Everybody gave the nod, but
okay,
everybody
hey,
finished
that's
the line,
okay,
so-
that's why there's 7 of us to fill it in.
Yes, appreciate that.
But we'll be here tomorrow for the Bonanza, talking with people, and it's always good, so if any of our finance committee members have a chance to drop by, please come by and you can talk with people, introduce yourself to people, let them know. But just appreciate the work you guys are doing and input that you have to give. That's kind of the goal behind that is, we've got a lot of different eyes, because, staff sees, they work on this for 8 months out of the year, and you look at something enough times and there's things that you don't see, and we as trustees look at it, but there's things that we don't see, so it's always good to have another set of eyes on it to catch things that nobody else got, so we can go through and hopefully by the end to come out with the best finished product that we can. So appreciate the work you guys have on that. We do have 1 applicant so far, I believe, for the 2 vacancies on the finance committee. We'll be doing interviews next Tuesday. So hopefully we'll be bringing you guys at least 1 more person. We're hoping to get more. So if you know of anyone, encourage them to apply. That's all I got.
I will be at the Bonanza and the interview.
Awesome.
Anything else anyone wants to share?
Other town reports, can we jump in? Like if people are watching, make sure you come even if you have kids. The library takes your kids and we do fun things so that you can be in here with your grown-up questions. Please.
Highly encourage that. My kids love it. They're all like, we want to go. We want to do the library stuff with Ross.
Bring them in, bring them in.
Yes, they have a great time.
All right, well, I just want to say thank you to everyone in the town for being here. Appreciate your time. Appreciate all the hard work that's gone into the budget. And I feel like there is good, there's some difficult things, but things are going well. So thank you. Thank you all.
I have a question. You said November, someone said November, we're gonna see financials
Mhm.
up to, do you know up to what month?
Through September is
Wow.
what we're shooting for. Yeah, our first
Thank
2022
you.
report. Yeah.
We're all pretty excited. Trust me.
Fingers crossed.
We're all excited.
Awesome,
Alright.
thank you.
Seeing no other reports. So at 7:29, we will adjourn. Thank you all.
Will we get to see the budget again?
Yes.